If there's one thing I've learned about desperation, it's that it lowers your standards fast. I never thought I'd be taking a job like this, graveyard shift clerk at a dingy roadside motel, but my bank account didn't care about my pride. The Duskwood Inn was as unremarkable as it sounded. Peeling paint, flickering neon sign, and a lobby that smelled faintly of mildew and stale coffee. Mr. Crenshaw, the manager, barely looked up from his clipboard as I walked in. He was grizzled, with a voice like gravel and a permanent scowl. "Ethan, right?" he muttered. "You're on the night shift. It's quiet, but there are rules. You'll follow them or you won't last long." I nodded, unsure what to say. He reached under the counter and handed me a battered, typewritten manual titled Night Clerk Protocols. "Read this," he said, his tone sharp. "The rules aren't suggestions. Follow them exactly and you'll be fine." I flipped through the pages, eyebrows raised at what I saw. 1. Never enter room 6, even if someone asks for help. 2. If the phone rings at 3:15 a.m., let it ring. Do not answer. 3. Greet every guest politely, but if someone arrives without a car, lock the front door immediately. 4. Do not check the surveillance cameras between 2 a.m. and 2:15 a.m. 5. Leave a key under the mat of room 4 at midnight, even if it's unoccupied. 6. If a guest asks for a second room key, do not give it to them. Instead, say we are out of spares. 7. Before leaving at sunrise, knock twice on the vending machine and wait for it to hum. I stared at the list, then back at Mr. Crenshaw. Is this some kind of prank? His expression didn't change. Do your job, kid, or don't. But if you break the rules, don't say I didn't warn you. Before I could press him, he grabbed his coat and left, leaving me alone in the empty lobby. The old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the silence of the place settled on me like a heavy blanket. I set the manual on the counter and leaned back in the creaky office chair. The rules were ridiculous, probably just a scare tactic for new employees. Sure, I'd follow them, mostly. No harm in bending a rule or two, right? The clock ticked slowly as I settled in for what I assumed would be a boring, uneventful night. But boredom was a luxury I wouldn't get to keep. Midnight came, and the stillness of the Duskwood Inn began to gnaw at me. The faint hum of the vending machine and the occasional flicker of the fluorescent lights were the only sounds in the lobby. I glanced at the clock. 12:15 a.m. Nothing had happened yet, but the weight of the manual sat heavy in my mind. I leaned back in the chair, scrolling aimlessly on my phone, trying to shake the creeping unease. That's when I heard it. A muffled voice. "Help, please." It was faint, barely audible over the buzzing lights, but unmistakable. I froze, my phone slipping out of my hand. The sound was coming from down the hallway. "Help, I'm trapped." My pulse quickened as I reached for my flashlight. The manual's first rule flashed in my mind. Never enter room 6, even if someone asks for help. I shook my head, trying to laugh off the tension in my chest. "Great, a prank," I muttered, standing up. But the voice came again, louder this time, desperate. "Please, someone, I'm hurt." I hesitated at the front desk, the flashlight heavy in my grip. What if someone really was in trouble? Maybe Mr. Crenshaw forgot to mention someone staying in room 6. Rules or not, I couldn't just ignore someone calling for help. I took a step toward the hallway, then another. The cries grew more frantic as I approached the door, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. I stopped in front of the room 6. The door was shut, the number faded but intact. I raised my hand to knock but stopped. The manual's warning repeated in my mind. Never enter room 6, even if someone asks for help. Something about the door felt wrong. The air was heavier here, colder. The faint smell of rot tickled my nose and I instinctively stepped back. The cries stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. "Hello," I called, my voice trembling. No answer. I backed away, my heart pounding, and returned to the desk. I set the flashlight down with shaking hands and stared at the clock, willing the minutes to tick by faster. But as the silence pressed down on me, I swore I heard it again, this time faint laughter. I buried my face in my hands, telling myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks on me. I didn't enter room 6. I followed the rule, but deep down, I felt it. I'd been noticed. My eyes flicked to rule 5. Leave a key under the mat of room 4 at midnight, even if it's unoccupied. I looked over at the empty key rack and then at the mat in front of room 4 on the surveillance monitor. There wasn't a single car in the lot tonight, and no one had checked into that room. "This is so stupid," I muttered under my breath. I picked up the key for room 4 and turned it over in my hand. What was I supposed to be doing anyway? Leaving keys under mats for non-existent guests? It had to be some kind of elaborate prank, or maybe just a way for Mr. Crenshaw to mess with the new guy. I tossed the key back onto the rack. I'm not doing it. As soon as the key clattered into place, the lights flickered. The vending machine in the corner let out a low hum, like it was alive. I looked around the lobby, my stomach knotting. "Just a coincidence," I said out loud, trying to steady my nerves. The night dragged on, but the motel felt different now. The silence wasn't calming anymore. It felt oppressive, almost alive. My skin prickled, and every creak of the old building set my nerves on edge. At 2:05 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. My eyes kept darting toward the surveillance cameras. Rule 4 flashed in my mind. Do not check the surveillance cameras between 2 a.m. and 2:15 a.m. What kind of job has rules like that? It didn't make sense. What was I supposed to be afraid of? A guest sneaking out for a midnight snack? I leaned forward and tapped the monitor's controls, switching to the feed of the hallways. Room 6 door was open. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. That door had been locked earlier. I was sure of it. My eyes stayed glued to the screen, waiting for something to move, to explain what I was seeing. And then it appeared. A dark, hunched figure crawled out of the room. Its limbs were long and jagged, and its movements were jerky, almost like a glitch in a video game. It dragged itself down the hallway slowly, its head twisting unnaturally as it moved. I flicked to another camera, but it was empty. Then another. Nothing. When I flipped back to the hall outside room 6, the figure was closer. Too close. It was dragging itself toward the lobby now, its hollow eyes staring directly at the camera. I slammed the monitor off, my hands trembling. The laughter I'd heard earlier returned, louder this time, echoing through the lobby. I spun around, searching for the source, but nothing was there. I grabbed the manual, gripping it tightly as if it could shield me. My mind raced. I hadn't entered room 6. I hadn't broken that rule. But I'd ignored the key, and I'd checked the cameras. What had I let in? The lobby felt colder now, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the last few minutes. I kept my eyes on the clock, my hands gripping the manual so tightly that the paper creased. My heart was pounding, my mind replaying the image of that hunched figure crawling toward the lobby. Just get through the night, I whispered to myself. Follow the rest of the rules and it'll be fine. The clock ticked closer to 3:15 a.m. I stared at it, counting down the seconds, dreading the time when Rule 2 would come into play. If the phone rings at 3:15 a.m., let it ring. Do not answer. I didn't want to believe it would actually ring. Surely, this was all just some elaborate prank. but deep down, I already knew better. When the phone rang, the sound pierced the silence like a blade. I jumped, nearly dropping the manual. The sound was sharper than it should have been, louder, almost mechanical. The phone vibrated on the desk with every shrill ring, each one setting my nerves on edge. I stared at it, my mouth dry, my hands shaking. "Don't answer it," I muttered to myself. "Just don't answer it." But it didn't stop. The ringing grew louder, more insistent, as if the phone was demanding my attention. I felt like the sound was burrowing into my skull, gnawing at my sanity. "What the hell do you want?" I snapped, snatching up the receiver. The line was silent at first. Then a faint static crackled in my ear, followed by a voice. It was distorted, low and guttural, like someone speaking through a broken radio. "Why didn't you leave the key?" I froze. My heart felt like it had stopped. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The voice came again, slower this time. "Why didn't you leave the key?" Before I could respond, the line went dead. The phone beeped once and then fell silent, leaving me clutching the receiver in stunned silence. I slammed the phone down, my pulse racing. I turned toward the lobby window, my breath catching in my throat. The parking lot wasn't empty anymore. Figures stood at the edge of the lot, their forms flickering like static. They were tall, with limbs too long and heads tilted unnaturally to the side. There were at least 5 of them, and they were perfectly still, their hollow eyes fixed on the lobby. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. My head spun as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I'd broken the rules, and now they were coming for me. I couldn't move. My legs felt frozen, my body locked in place as I stared out the lobby window. The figures at the edge of the parking lot stood completely still, their hollow eyes boring into me. No, not into me, through me. I stumbled back to the desk, gripping its edge to steady myself. My mind raced, replaying the voice on the phone. "Why didn't you leave the key?" The manual sat on the desk. The words, "Leave a key under the mat of room 4 at midnight," glaring back at me like an accusation. "I can fix this," I muttered, grabbing the key for room 4. My hands trembled as I bolted toward the hallway, the key digging into my palm. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, flickering as I passed under them. The hallway seemed longer than I remembered, stretching unnaturally. My footsteps echoed, and the air felt thicker, colder. I reached room 4 and crouched down, slipping the key under the mat as quickly as I could. "There," I whispered. "It's done." I stood up and turned back toward the lobby, but the hallway wasn't the same. It twisted before my eyes, the walls narrowing, stretching, bending like I was inside some funhouse maze. The lights flickered again, and I heard it, faint laughter echoing from behind me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly, I turned, and there it was, the hunched figure from room 6. It crawled toward me, its limbs jerking and snapping as it moved. Its face, or what should have been a face, was a hollow void, blacker than the shadows around it. Its head tilted to the side, and it let out a low, guttural sound that made my stomach churn. "Stay back!" I shouted, stumbling backward. But it kept coming, dragging itself closer, its long fingers scratching the floor. I turned and ran. The hallway seemed endless. No matter how fast I ran, the lobby stayed out of reach, the lights buzzing louder and louder above me. The faint laughter followed me, growing louder, more distorted. When I finally burst into the lobby, I slammed the door shut behind me. My chest heaved, and sweat dripped down my face as I leaned against the desk. But the figures were still there. They were closer now, just outside the window. I could see them more clearly, their impossibly long limbs, their hollow, flickering faces. One of them tilted its head, and I swear it smiled at me. The vending machine in the corner let out a loud hum, breaking the silence. The manual. My eyes darted to it, and I flipped to the final rule. Before leaving at sunrise, knock twice on the vending machine and wait for it to hum. The figures outside began moving, their jerky movements growing faster. I had one chance left. The humming from the vending machine grew louder, vibrating through the walls and cutting through the static-filled silence of the lobby. My pulse raced as I clutched the manual, the final rule repeating in my head, knock twice on the vending machine and wait for it to hum. The figures outside the window began to move. Slowly at first, their long, flickering limbs jerking unnaturally as they crept closer. Their hollow eyes seemed to glow faintly, locking onto me as though they could see straight into my soul. I couldn't wait any longer. I stumbled over to the vending machine, nearly tripping over my own feet. My hands were slick with sweat as I raised them, knuckles trembling. Knock, knock. The machine hummed louder, its vibrations almost deafening now. I backed away, gripping the edge of the counter, waiting, praying that this would end whatever was happening. For a moment, the figures froze. The flickering stopped, their heads tilting unnaturally to the side. And then the vending machine dispensed something. A key. It clattered into the tray below, small and blank, with no markings to indicate which room it belonged to. My stomach dropped. The lights in the lobby flickered violently, and the shadows outside disappeared. No, not disappeared, they were inside. I spun around, and the hunched figure from room 6 stood inches away. It towered over me now, its hollow, featureless face somehow glaring. Behind it, the other figures emerged, their limbs stretching and twisting unnaturally as they filled the room. "You broke the rules," a low, guttural voice rasped, though none of their mouths moved. I tried to fix it," I stammered, backing against the wall. The hunched figure tilted its head, its hollow face growing darker, impossibly darker, as if it was sucking the light from the room. "Too late," it hissed. The figures swarmed me. Cold, inhuman hands gripped my arms, my legs, my throat. I thrashed and screamed, but it was useless. The air grew colder and heavier, and the room began to twist, the walls folding inward like the motel was consuming me. When I opened my eyes, everything was silent. I was back in the lobby, standing at the front desk. The clock read 6 a.m., the lights were steady, the vending machine was quiet, and the parking lot outside was empty. For a moment, I thought it was over, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, my hands gripping the desk like they were glued to it. My mouth wouldn't open and my legs wouldn't respond. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The glass door jingled as someone entered the lobby. It was a new clerk, a young woman, her eyes wide as she glanced around nervously. Mr. Crenshaw followed her, handing her the same manual he'd given me. "Follow the rules and you'll do just fine," he said, his voice calm, almost cheerful. "What happened to the last guy?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. Crenshaw smirked. "He's still here, in a way." The girl's eyes flicked toward me and I saw her shudder. I tried to warn her, to tell her to run, but I couldn't. My reflection in the window behind her caught my eye. My face was pale and lifeless, my eyes dark and hollow. I was no longer Ethan. I was just another part of the Duskwood Inn. Thank you for listening to the chilling tale of the Night Clerk's Manual. Were you spooked by Ethan's eerie encounters at the Duskwood Inn? Drop a comment to share your thoughts, and if you're brave enough for more ghostly stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to like and share this video with those who dare to delve into the supernatural.